let you know once it's on.
Yep.
It's live.
Hello, Internet. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Procrastination Awareness Week workshop. My name is Anthony Adema, and I am a Learning Center coordinator with Seneca Polytechnic. And I was asked by our lovely hosts to come and give a workshop on time management. So I have actually a presentation that I use at our school, and this is the presentation that I would be delivering to Seneca students. So I just want to thank the organizers of this event for inviting and having us, myself and my coworker Fernanda, here for Procrastination Awareness Week. And I'm really excited for everyone to have a chance to see some of the points, strategies, and discussions we have around mental health and time management at Seneca Polytechnic. So without further ado, I am going to go and just have a quick review of our agenda today. So I'm going to start with a welcome and acknowledgement. I'd like to talk a little bit, very briefly, about Seneca Polytechnic Learning Center and just do a little bit of a humble brag about what we offer. I want to talk a little bit about mental health awareness and how it relates to time management. I've got 3 strategies that I'm going to be sharing that are very specific, but they do have mental health benefits. So that's why I want to have that conversation flow. I'm going to have an opportunity for some questions with it Ask Me Anything, and then I'm going to end by putting it all together. So without further ado, I'm going to start by providing a land acknowledgement. Seneca Polytechnic aims to incorporate Indigenous teachings into our practices. So a land acknowledgement at the beginning of our presentations is a really respectful way to bring that narrative into our teaching spaces. So this presentation is based in Toronto and is located on the land stewarded by Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat nations. I acknowledge Treaty 13, the Toronto Purchase, signed with Mississauga credits of the First Nation, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississauga and Chippewa First Nations. We are all interconnected as treaty people with a shared obligation to learn, respect, honor, and sustain. So, to, again, very briefly speak to some of these services that we provide at Seneca Polytechnic Learning Centers, including one-to-one peer tutoring, academic coaching, drop-in sessions, and workshops to help students succeed on their academic journey. So again, this is just a really brief overview. There's a QR code that will take us to your website in case you have any other, or you want to check out some of our other services and what we offer. All right, so now that we've kind of got the housekeeping items out of the way, I'd like to take a little bit of time to talk about what is mental health. And one of the most common experiences I have when I'm coaching students is when they share with me either their state of mental health at that moment or any challenges or issues they are having with their mental health. So this is often a common point of discussion when I'm meeting with students for academic coaching. And so in this sense, I'm referring to mental health as the emotional, psychological, and social well-being of students. And some of the more common experiences with mental health include anxiety, depression, and stress. And so again, as an academically based service, our goal is to increase the likelihood of success in students. But without acknowledging what real barriers may be happening with a student, some of our services might not be as effective as they could be. So when I meet with a new student or I'm meeting with a student who is sharing with me the state of their mental health, and maybe they are in a bit of crisis or it's impacting their daily routines, I always try to have a discussion where I'm talking to the student about addressing their mental health issues by seeing a doctor or a health professional. Some of the more common experiences that students will share with me when it comes to their academic success include barriers such as the inability to focus, a loss of motivation, sleep disruptions, or an increase in their sleep and the amount of sleep that they're doing. And again, some of these can be symptoms of other mental health issues. Sometimes it's just a bad night or a bad day. However, the most important thing to address here is the fact that if those specific mental health barriers are not addressed, the tools and strategies that I'm sharing with them won't be very helpful because they might not have enough emotional energy to do the tasks. They might not have the emotional energy to follow through or even track some of their behaviors. So, again, for me, a big part of time management is naming and acknowledging mental health stressors as a key to moving forward. And again, some of the students I speak with will have a family doctor, and I'll encourage them to talk to them. Some students don't have a family doctor, and I encourage them to use walk-in clinics or hospitals within their area should they need other mental health services. But, I shouldn't say but, however, one of the things I like to do after talking about mental health and how a student might be sharing their experience with me is linking it to how mental health and academic success are really connected. And for me, academic success includes the ability to regulate yourself during the semester. So what this looks like is knowing that you might have 4 or 5 classes a week, knowing that you might have 4 or 5 work shifts, and knowing that you're going to have to travel and experience different deadlines within those classes. And so all of that stress needs to be coped with, and there needs to be the ability to navigate it in a successful way. And so today, when I'm going to be talking about time management, I'm really going to be focusing on how those strategies can help reduce the stress and anxiety of the academic pressures that many students feel. So again, that's why when I'm talking and sharing about this, I want to create an open space that people feel welcome to talk about what their state of experience is at this moment. So once we have done that, we can actually move into discussing what is time management. And for me, I really boil it down to 3 main key strategies or maybe even tools you might have. But number 1 is using your time effectively. I know this sounds very straightforward and it might even be a little easy that you're like, yes, of course you would want to use your time effectively. But the act of using your time effectively is a skill that needs to be developed. So I want to talk a little bit about how there's some strategies I can suggest that might help you with that. Next, I want to talk about calendars, timers, and reminders. A lot of times there are ways in which you can track your daily, weekly, and monthly schedules, either through electronic ways or paper-based ways. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how monitoring some of your not behaviors, managing certain parts of your routine can be really helpful in understanding how to use your time effectively. And finally, I really want to focus on planning ahead. Once again, I know this seems like a straightforward, maybe simple answer, but the concept of planning ahead, particularly at the beginning of each semester, actually can pay off huge later on in the semester. So I want to talk about how it's important to do a little bit of legwork at the beginning of each semester so that you can actually set yourself up for success by the end of the semester. So, to begin, let's start with the first technique. Good old Pomodoro. So Pomodoro technique is a very common technique that is shared. A lot of people know about it. Many students that come into my sessions with me will say that they've either heard about Pomodoro or they've tried it once and it didn't work for them, which is fine. Sometimes learning strategies are not necessarily always going to be effective for everyone. So I do encourage students to try different ones. And if they're not working, it's okay to move on from them. However, what I do emphasize with Pomodoro is that it is a very effective way to break up tasks and work into smaller chunks of time. A lot of times when students come into me and I ask them about what are your study routines? What does a day of studying look like to you? And so oftentimes students will share that they say they'll study, they'll engage in study behaviors for, 6 hours, 7 hours, maybe even 8 hours. And when I'm having that conversation and they tell me that, I kind of flip the question on them and say, okay, well, that sounds like a lot of time to commit to studying. Are you studying for those entire 8 hours? Oftentimes the word is no. The answer is no. It's the amount of time taking up your time, or the amount of time you're committed to that might be 8 hours, but you're not necessarily studying nonstop for the entire time. So this to me is a way in which some people cannot necessarily use their time effectively. However, I always encourage students to try Pomodoro and practice it in different ways rather than just jumping right into it. So again, using the visual on screen, a Pomodoro technique would typically begin with you choosing a work or task that you're going to do. You're going to set a timer for 25 minutes, wait till that timer runs out and work during that time, and then take a 5-minute break. Once you've finished that routine 4 times, you would then take a longer 15 to 30-minute break. So again, this logically sounds really, really easy and straightforward. However, when you break it down or you even attempt to try to do it, oftentimes students are met with barriers or not successful with using it. And what I suggest is that instead of jumping into Pomodoro with study time, begin by practicing Pomodoro outside of study time during your downtime. Maybe you're listening to an album. Maybe you're playing a video game. Maybe you're reading a book. Maybe you're watching TV. Maybe you're doom scrolling on social media. Whatever activity it is, practice the Pomodoro technique during downtimes and not stressful activities. A lot of times when people are beginning to study or students are beginning to set up a study routine to, go into their final exam prepared, that's when they try to use Pomodoro. And oftentimes during that study time, it's stressful. The deadline is slowly encroaching. Energy is building, and students will then say, okay, I'm going to try to use Pomodoro. And then they try it and it doesn't work well, or it doesn't work the way they thought it would. And they get anxious when they're supposed to take their break because you're like, I've got a test tomorrow. Why am I taking a break? So again, a lot of students say that when they're using it for the first time during that stressful time, it's not helpful. But that's because your mind and your body haven't gotten used to it. They're surprised by all these breaks. So again, I encourage students to practice using Pomodoro outside of that study time. Once you've done it 4, 5, 7, 8 times, then you're going to be a little bit more prepared so that when you do enter that stressful academic time, you're going to have more practice with it and you're going to be more sure of what's coming up. Another strategy I encourage students to try is to personalize the amount of work time versus break time. I've met some students who actually have short attention spans. And so they really find it challenging to work on a task for maybe more than 15 minutes. And so I've worked with students where they've personalized their Pomodoro routine. And instead of it being 25 work, 5 break, I've had students tell me that they use 15 minutes of work and 15 minutes of break. And again, that might seem like a lot, but that's because it might not work for you. The The point here is to individualize what technique or the Pomodoro to your routine. Sometimes people might actually use 45 minutes of work time and then a 15-minute break. And maybe they do that cycle twice instead of 4 times. Just different examples of different variations might work for you. So don't feel like you have to follow it word by word, minute by minute. Feel free to play around with it. There's even a more popular version of Pomodoro, I guess, an advanced technique, I guess, is being called flow time. And so the idea is that you're working until you need a break. But to me, that's a little bit of an advanced technique that I might only recommend to those who have used Pomodoro. But again, I think there's different ways in which you can approach it to see what works best for your schedule. And lastly, what I really emphasize with students is that they should try the Pomodoro and continue practicing it for at least 3 weeks. Many times when you start to change your behavior, it's going to be challenging for your brain and your body because humans like routines. It's really easy to know what's coming up, and sudden changes can actually be quite disruptive, both to our emotional state and our nervous system. So, when you are going to be practicing Pomodoro, acknowledge that there might be times it's not going to work out well. And you might have an experience that doesn't result in you doing the cycles exactly how they're supposed to be. But that's okay. I encourage students to be resilient, keep pushing through, and keep trying the technique for at least 3 weeks. When you have the ability to practice and understand how the technique is working, I find students tend to be a lot more receptive to it, and they are able to be more successful in using it. So I hope everyone has a better understanding of how they can incorporate Pomodoro into their technique now. So I'd like to spend some time talking about what I call a time management audit. So the term audit is often used in conjunction with taxes. When you are required to pay taxes, there may be a time when the government wants to assess or go through the information you provided with them, and this is often referred to as an audit. So when I use the term time management audit, what I'm really referring to is the process of tracking your behavior, tracking how you're spending your time. And that involves tracking your daily tasks and how much time you give to each activity. And I'm going to go through a little bit of an example about how you can collect some of that data. But a time management audit really is an opportunity to see, is there a difference or a mismatch between what you think you do and what you actually do? So a good example of this that I like to use is when I discuss starting to work at Seneca Polytechnic and me getting myself organized to go to work. And so as I'm preparing, I go to Google Maps and I look and I get directions that will bring me from my house front door to the front door of Seneca campus. And as I see this, it's only going to take 45 minutes, which is great. That's not a long time on the subway. I only have to take one bus. It's very simple and straightforward. So I go about the routine of getting on the subway, getting on the bus, and going to Seneca. What I didn't realize is that Seneca campus is huge and that the front door of Seneca is where the directions put me, but that walking throughout campus can actually take anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes. So suddenly I'm at the front door of Seneca, but I'm supposed to be at my desk. And now I'm going to have to walk through campus somewhere I've never been before to try and find my desk in the learning center. In addition to that, I didn't get a I didn't get a tea before I left that day. So now I'm also in the place where I know I need to have a tea because without that, I don't know if I'm going to function on my first day. So now I've added another 15 minutes into my routine that I didn't anticipate. And so suddenly a Google Map instruction of 45 minutes has now turned into something closer to an hour and a half. And so that for me is a good example about there was a mismatch between what I thought I needed to do and how much time it would take me and the actual amount of time it took me to complete that. So when I'm talking with students about an audit, I suggest that they start to track their tasks and how long it takes them to do them. So in this chart I have here, I've got the date in which they've chosen, the activities that they're doing, the start time, end time, and the total amount of hours it takes. The category on the left of priority comes in handy once you review all that data. And you can see what are the activities that you cannot miss, that you have to do, and that they have to come before other maybe more preferred activities. So in this example, what I encourage students to do is start with their morning routine and end the day with their sleep or night routine. And again, the morning routine is another example of how sometimes we can lose sight of how much time it actually takes. So again, something as simple as waking up and getting out of bed to the point where you're at the front door leaving to go is a wide variety of tasks that need to be completed. And so again, you might think, oh, I only need half an hour to get ready. But what that means is that you need half an hour when you get into the shower, get out, get dressed, and get. So the last half hour. But what about the hour before that, when maybe you had to get up, you had to pack for the day? Maybe you're starting to make dinner or prepare food for the later on in the day. All those things take time and energy. And so it's important to be able to understand how much time a task is taking you. So once students have had a chance to do this over the day, and oftentimes I've actually even suggested students do it for 2 or 3 days, because maybe there's a different schedule on Monday that there is on Friday, or maybe Saturday or Sunday. So again, after I've encouraged them to take this information, and it does take some effort. This is again where I was talking about it sometimes takes a little bit of effort at the beginning to plan ahead. This would be one of those examples. It does take a lot of energy to remind yourself you're tracking time. I've encouraged students to use their phone, open a note app, and try to track your time there. Other times, students have preferred paper and pen. And so they've actually printed out the chart and they actually track the time in pen throughout the day because it's easier for them to access and remember, because there's this piece of paper in your pocket and there's a pen and you're constantly being reminded. So again, I find this to be a little bit work heavy, but the benefits tend to play out once you finish that data tracking and you can create a schedule that incorporates the time that you take for your activities. So rather than kind of cookie cutter providing somebody with, okay, this is what you do in the morning, the afternoon, the night, and you kind of repeat that, this is a lot more individualized, particularly because I know quite a number of students who have to incorporate work into their schedules. And to me, that's again where the priority comes in. Work is something that students can't miss. As important as the academic learning process is, being able to financially support yourself is a real reality for many students. So that becomes one of the most important parts of their week. They need to set aside time for work and they need to be able to complete that work so that the second priority, class, is then able to be incorporated into the schedule more effectively. So again, here I've broken down when there's times when class is happening on campus, when classes are happening online, study periods where time can be taken to complete the actual work, in having work shifts in part of your schedule. And then again, I usually leave Saturday and Sunday blank because I want students to be able to have some downtime. Again, reality tells us that jobs and academic expectations are going to be there. However, I encourage students to use that time effectively on Saturdays and Sundays, the weekend, to try and give themselves some breaks and to take a little bit of downtime themselves. So I realize we're running through this quite fast, but I want to take the last little bit to talk a little bit about planning ahead. And I think, for the majority of this presentation, I have had, uh, I have been addressing planning ahead. Even when Pomodoro is being used, you're planning ahead as to how much time is going to be used studying. When you're tracking your time, you're planning ahead to see where you can find some free time for yourself. So the concept of planning ahead, for me, is an essential part of academic success. And so many students I see often struggle with creating their own academic routines, oftentimes because secondary education, high school, can provide a lot of guidance. And that's not to say it's a bad thing, but I do find there is a little bit of a wake up call that happens with some students because suddenly they're in charge of their schedule. They're the ones that have to set up a consistent routine. They're the ones that are responsible for completing the work assigned in the class. And again, planning ahead is a skill. It's not something that comes naturally to everyone. Sometimes people can have neurodiverse responses to neurotypical planning. And I think that's really where I start to make space for students who might not have those planning skills. And that's not to say they're never going to have them. In fact, if anything, this is an opportunity for them to learn those skills. And so, what I'm going to be talking about now is specifically a tool that we at Seneca offer, but I do know that majority of post-secondary institutions offer. And that's something called the assignment planner. And this is a general, again, as I say, very common tool that is offered throughout many post-secondary education spaces. The idea being that this assignment planner will generate a list of dates and a list of tasks that will help you complete the type of assignment you're asking for. So again, I usually include a QR code to the Seneca Polytechnic assignment planner. And I will actually go through using the assignment planner with the student together. Again, the reason being is planning ahead is not always a natural skill that people have. So, using tools like an assignment planner can allow you to get some guidance and structure for students, I should say, to develop their own study routines that work for them. So in this case, I want to focus on a final exam and what that would look like for a student who has, say, 5 classes. And so typically with assignment planners, and specifically in Seneca's, there is a date to choose where you will begin the assignment. There is a space where you will input the assignment due date. And then you're going to select the type of assignment. So again, in this case, I want to create a routine or kind of a study plan for the final exam. And not just one final exam, but multiple final exams. Because again, some students might be lucky that they can hand in assignments and not have final exams. Reality is many classes do have those final exams that need time to prepare for. So what I like to do is choose a start date. So in this case, I've chosen the beginning of February. I ended on Friday, April 12th. Again, just as a week before the exams. Seneca ends on our last date is Friday, April 19th. So I've kind of put in this date that is close to the final exam. And then when I click submit, a list of dates and tasks is generated. Now, again, this is very specific to Seneca. So I wouldn't suggest necessarily using our assignment planner unless you go to Seneca Polytechnic. However, what I want to show with this as an example is how this is a jumping off point. Oftentimes when the assignment planner generates those dates and those tasks, they're quite generic, they're quite broad. And that's because it's really hard to provide specifics for your course when this is made to provide a general response. So, similar almost to the ways in which ChatGPT can be used as a tool to start from, I consider assignment planners the same process. This is a jumping off point. So now this assignment planner has generated these dates and tasks, but what do those mean? So, here it's saying for the month of February, the three main tasks would be to prepare studying, deciding what to study, and finally deciding where to study. And again, these are all incredibly important parts of a study routine, particularly the where are you studying? Because it's important to have those internal conversations to say, do I study better at the library? Do I study better in my room? Are there lots of distractions? So again, this isn't necessarily things that are going to be generated by the assignment planner, but these are questions that I ask the students. What do you think is the best environment you study in? Because those conversations need to happen. So again, now that we've got the first month is about the generic where or what to study, then it provides us a task of study the material between Monday, March 18th and Thursday, April 11th, the day before the exam. Wonderful. That is great. Study the material a month before the exam. Sounds fantastic. And it is, but this is where the planning and the additional information needs to come in from the student. So once we have this, I ask student questions about what are the next steps or what are the things that we really need to focus on. And then from there, I use a template of a monthly calendar. And here I've included a version of it. This isn't exactly what mine looks like, but it's fair proximity. So this monthly study schedule calendar is usually blank when I start with a student. And the reason being is I want them to take ownership of it. I'm very happy to provide a template to students to say, hey, listen, this document might be really helpful for you. However, I want them to start to take ownership of creating their own study schedule. So the jumping off point of the assignment planner and the template of this monthly study schedule calendar are two ways in which I can provide tools to students and show them how they can use them to be more independently successful. In this example, I've taken 6 weeks before the final exams. And in this student example that I've chosen, there are 4 final exams happening. When I am discussing those final exams with students, it's not just about when the exam is, but I also ask, how are you doing in each class? And the reason being for that is it is important to be able to adjust your expectations and your allotted work time for that exam study. In this example, when I was talking with the student, Calm 101 was their most difficult class. My cat is going to make a cameo. And so when I spoke with the student, Calm 101 was the most challenging course. And it always did, their class happen on Mondays. And so even before the final exam, they had decided that Sundays in their schedule were going to be the day in which they do their Calm 101 work. And that's because they really understood the importance of that course. They weren't doing so well in it, but they needed to pass. So the final exam and the weeks leading up to it were going to be an opportunity for them to strengthen their place in the course and ensure that they pass. So when we were coming up with the study schedule, Calm 101 was the #1 priority. We had a conversation and they shared with me what was going on in the course and how they felt about it. The next 2 exams that happened on Wednesday, April 17th, are CAS 208 and ENGC 210. Now, when I was speaking with a student, they told me that these were the two easiest courses. And they ended up, unfortunately, having their two exams on one day. So while we were discussing their monthly study schedule, we had a conversation about how they're doing in those courses. They found the weekly assignments to be very easy to complete. They found the weekly readings to be manageable. They understood the core concepts and they were doing well in both of the courses. They didn't really see a concern for their studying because they knew that if they kept up with their weekly work, the final exam would be very manageable. So again, that discussion about how are you doing in the class came into context when we realized they had time on Saturdays and that they could actually do both studying for both courses on the same day. And they only had to allocate 3 hours to it. They decided that they only needed an hour for CAS 208, but that they wanted to offer 2 hours for ENGC 210. So again, using their awareness of what was expected of them, they created a study schedule that used their time efficiently. Instead of over assigning time to instead of over committing time to courses that they didn't have problems with, they understood that they only needed to allot a certain amount of time. And so that really worked out for them. Finally, the student shared with me that CAS 250 was a challenging course, but they felt that they were getting better as the semester went on. In the beginning, they felt very unsure of their skills and their abilities, but as the course went on, they tended to get more comfortable and confident with the materials. So when we talked about the study schedule, they said that it was important for it to have its own day, and there was time in their Wednesday afternoons. They only had an online course on Wednesday mornings, and then they had the afternoon free. So it was decided that they would be able to set aside time to focus on CAS 250. And that was effective for them because, again, they knew that they were going to be able to do their exam if they allotted enough time. Now, when it got to the final week of exams, they planned a little bit differently. First of all, COM 101 was already on Sunday. So again, they was able to feed well into their study schedule in that they were already used to studying on Sundays. So that when their COM 101 final exam happened on the Monday, they actually were feeling confident about going into it. And now on the Tuesday, April 16th, instead of maybe cramming or focusing too much on CAS 208 and ENGC, they actually devoted time to studying for CAS 250. Again, based on their own awareness of the classes, they knew that they didn't need to allot a lot of time to study. In fact, if anything, maybe on the 16th, they could set down a little bit of time, but they didn't need to set aside a huge amount of time. And so that when they were able to finish their exams on the 17th, because they had studied on the 16th, they actually chose not to study on the 17th. And that was very scary for them because, again, in their mind, it's the day before an exam. You should be studying. But you should be studying is actually an old narrative from before planning ahead. And that's because, again, a lot of times approaches to exam would be to try and cram in as much information at that last 24 hours. The student moved away from that. And this schedule helped them stay on track because instead of being stressed that they didn't know when they were going to study for the exam, each week they had it already set aside so that all they had to do was go on autopilot. Again, a lot of the heavy lifting of creating this schedule, understanding and collecting time management data allowed them to create this schedule so that by the beginning of February, they knew what was going to be coming for the next 2 months. They knew what exams they were going to be writing and how they were going to be studying for them. So again, to me, this is a great example of the payoff of that heavy lifting at the beginning of each semester. And I really encourage students to try this again every semester, start anew. Once it starts, you have already done the data collecting of your time management audit. So now it's really just about creating your monthly study schedules. This is also where I tend to have a conversation with people about calendars. Calendars are an extremely useful tool and they can be personalized. Many people have electronic calendars available on their phones, and those can be very helpful. I know I use Google Calendar to organize both my work and personal life, and it's fantastic. However, there is value in having a physical calendar, particularly wall calendars. And the reason why I'm such a big fan of wall calendars is because number one, it's a visual that you can't avoid. A lot of times when calendars or timers or reminders are on our phone, it's very easy to swipe them, ignore, maybe even turn notifications off. So suddenly this important reminder is just being brushed aside because, oh, it's very easy for me to move ahead from that. So with a wall calendar, what I find is a lot of students can't hide from their schedule. If they put it in their room, it's staring back at them and they're seeing what is coming up. And so while that can be anxiety inducing for some people, for a lot of people, it can actually be very calming and it can be helpful in knowing what's coming up. So I often encourage students to get a wall calendar. Dollar stores sell them super cheap. They're laminated, getting some dry erase markers, maybe even some stickers to personalize them. Whatever you do to make it your own is a helpful way for you to use it more consistently. And again, electronic versions of this are very easy to transfer over to wall calendars. So even though this, again, electronic file might be available on a laptop or phone, I find students have told me that they really appreciated the transfer to the physical calendar so that they could visually track when things were happening and be prepared for it. So we have come to the end of my speaking, the bulk of my speaking, and I hope you have found those strategies helpful. Again, this is a typical workshop that I would run either in person or online. And oftentimes, I've been running this more online than in person. And so it's quite easy to show up and listen to some strategies. But what I really hope that you got out of today is that you were able to tech some of the techniques and maybe see how they can be modified, or how about or maybe even some life hacks that might make them easier to use. So oftentimes, or sorry, typically this is where I would offer the participants to ask me anything. If there are any issues, or sorry, they would ask me if they had any questions about specific strategies. And again, this is where a lot of times people are looking for that individualized help in a workshop. So I'd be happy to talk with them in the workshop about what might work for their schedule. And oftentimes I find that prompts the other students to ask their questions. So again, I really enjoy using the Ask Me Anything opportunity to really narrow in on individual questions that students might have about these specific strategies. But since this is a live stream, there's not going to be any opportunities for people to ask me anything, which is more than okay. But I would like to finish by putting it all together. And at the beginning of this conversation, I really emphasize the importance of mental health awareness. And so I always encourage students to recognize, be aware of your mental health, be aware that barriers to academic success can come from mental health crises. Second, I encourage students to use supports. Use the tools and supports available to you. Sometimes there can be a shame attached to asking for help, or maybe a nervousness that it's not genuine if you're using help or you didn't earn it. And those are false narratives. So I really, really encourage students to break through that shame, ask for help, and use tools and supports that are available to you. Finally, I emphasize on planning. Taking time to plan ahead at the beginning of each semester is a fantastic way for you to set yourself up for success by the end of the semester. And with that, I am going to say thank you so much for coming and joining me on this discussion. I quite enjoy talking about time management, and I love talking about mental health. So the fact that I was able to find a way for these two topics to intersect and for us to explore how some of the ways in which mental health can impact your academic success is a great way to focus on the importance of using time management. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great session. Talk to you soon.